Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world today. Thank you so much for joining our session entitled Grit, the Power of Perseverance in partnership with the MBA for Executives program at the Wharton School. My name is Alex Barampuria. I'm one of our co-founders here at Ivy Exec, and I'm so honored to be moderating our discussion today with two truly incredible Wharton alum that I've gotten an opportunity to get to know over the past few weeks. Before we begin, we have a few brief housekeeping items, as you know, for all of you, our audience. First, all of you are in listen-only mode. That'll ensure that we have really good sound quality and facilitate our discussion with our two guests. However, we want to encourage you to engage in the session by asking questions, which you should be able to do through the control panel. And please just send those questions over to us throughout. We want this to be as organic of a discussion on the topic of grit as we possibly can. And your participation is very much well received. We've organized our session today as a virtual fireside chat, as I mentioned. And what we will be doing is recording our sessions. So if you, as well as those that may not have been able to attend live, are looking for it, you can expect a recording to be provided to you by email in the coming days. And so with that, it is my honor to introduce you to a good friend and colleague, Peggy Bishop-Lane, Vice Dean for the MBA for Executives program at the Wharton School, who will introduce our guest for today. Peggy?
Thanks, Alex. And welcome everyone to today's webinar sponsored by the Wharton MBA program for Executives. As Alex said, I'm Dr. Peggy Bishop-Lane, the Vice Dean of the program, and also an accounting professor here at Wharton. The Wharton MBA program for Executives is one of two ways a student can earn the Wharton MBA degree. Our program is suited to mid-level and executive-level professionals in a variety of fields, industries, and functions, including media, finance, healthcare, government, engineering, entrepreneurship, and data analytics. The program is offered in an every other weekend format in both Philadelphia and San Francisco. Today, we are pleased to have two of our marvelous alumni to address today's topic, grit, the power of perseverance. It's my pleasure to introduce them to you now. Marla Blevins, class of 2012, is the Deputy Executive Director of Finance and Administration and the CFO for the Port of Los Angeles, the #1 container port in the nation and the highest rated U.S. seaport operating without tax support. Marla manages the port's financial affairs and oversees its financial and HR divisions. Prior to her appointment at the port, Marla served as the Assistant General Manager for Finance and Administration at the City of Los Angeles Department of Convention and Tourism Development, and as Project Manager and Debt and Treasury Manager at Los Angeles World Airports. While at the LA airport, she decided that to go back to school both to enhance her position at the time and to create more opportunities, a clear example of her perseverance. This past fall, Marla was named Public Service CFO of the Year by the Los Angeles Business Journal. She holds a Bachelor of Arts in Public Policy and Political Science from Stanford, and of course has her MBA from the Wharton School. Vinny Perez, class of 2019, serves as Lithium Strategy Director at Compass Minerals and has over 20 years of sales, marketing, and strategy experience in several commercial leadership roles in South and North America in the steel and advanced materials industries. As an example of Vinny's grit, as a youngster in Brazil, he worked at a test prep school for free at night so he could take classes there during the day and improve his scores to get into a competitive Brazilian university. It worked. Having a strong technical and commercial background, he pursued his executive MBA at the Wharton School in order to gain global knowledge for business areas such as marketing and management. He also holds a Bachelor of Science in Metallurgical Engineering from Universidade Federal de Rio Grande do Sul and an advanced degree in Commercial Management from FGV. I'm excited to hear from these two Wharton Executive MBA graduates as they discuss grit and perseverance with Alex Barampuria, co-founder and Chief Growth Officer of Ivy Exec. Alex, take it away.
Thank you so much, Peggy. And Vinny, Marla, it's so nice to be with you today.
Likewise. Thank you. Yeah.
Great. And so before we jump in again, we welcome everyone's questions. I've prepared a few that I've asked Vinny and Marla to think about, but we really want this to be an authentic experience for all of us. And before we begin, and hopefully this can set the stage for our discussion, Marla and Vinny, I thought it would be important just to sort of outline what we are sort of basing our discussion around. And that is quite a bit inspired by Angela Duckworth, who is a professor at the Wharton School, and research shows that those who believe in achieving success through hard work, grit, and those that operate with a growth mindset tend to achieve more than those that have a more fixed mindset, or what we'll define fixed mindset as those who believe their talents are innate gifts. I think operating with a sense of humility comes with operating with a growth mindset. And what we find is that when executives embrace a growth mindset, not only are they operating at a high level, their teams report feeling more empowered, more committed. They also receive far greater organizational support for the collaboration and innovation that they're looking to strive for. So in the wake of these sorts of findings, the terms grit and growth mindset have become, I would say, buzzwords for many major companies, even working their way into mission statements of a lot of organizations at the moment. And so how do we, especially with all that's happening in the world around us, how do we adopt that type of mindset for ourselves, for our organizations, and what are the keys to success? That's the heart of our discussion today. And so, of course, Marla, Vinny, I'm so honored to have you both be part of our discussion today. And I mentioned Angela Duckworth. And so my first question is going to be sort of tied to this discussion around grit. And Angela is one of the preeminent researchers on the topic of grit and perseverance. She's a professor of psychology at the Wharton School, and as many of you may know, she's also a best-selling author. Her research focuses on two traits that predict achievement, grit being one of them, and Duckworth defines grit as the tendency to sustain interest in and effort toward very long-term goals. Success is not always achieved immediately. And so on average, individuals who are gritty are often focused, self-controlled, but the correlation between grit and looking at self-control is not necessarily always perfect. But I'd like to sort of move away from the research now and sort of look at more practically your experiences, your life experiences around your journeys. And so the first question I'd like to explore is what role grit has played and where you are as a leader today. And so Marla, maybe we can have you start off. You have started, you started a career professionally as a financial specialist for the city of Los Angeles, and now have managed multi-billion-dollar capital projects for LAX and the CFO for the Port of Los Angeles today. What role has grit played for you in your journey up to this point?
Thank you, Alex. Well, I think that grit has definitely been a big role in part of my career development. When you become a public servant, and with the system that we have in Los Angeles, the civil service system, if you will, you really have to take the long view, and things don't always happen quickly for you, or maybe as quickly as you would have liked. The pacing isn't always even like it might be in other spaces. There are times where you might feel like you're plateauing, and then there are other times where you have to take big steps. And I think both of them require a lot of grit to get through. Coming to the Port of Los Angeles, I came from a much smaller department that had about 100 people, and eventually actually had much fewer than that. And the port has about 1,000 employees. And so that was definitely a big transition to make for me. But I think that the grit that I gained and the unique experience that I had when I was at the convention center really helped me with adapting to a larger organization. I know that some people said, oh, how are you going to do it? But I find sometimes that when you're in a smaller organization, you have to wear many hats. And that's good training for going to a larger organization because it broadens your perspective. I think there's also grit. It took a lot of grit to get through the Wharton WIMBA program. Working and going to school at the same time is no easy task. There were times even before I got my MBA that I just took a one-off accounting class here or there, and that was even challenging, having to drive 3 hours to get to the class in LA traffic. But in all seriousness, I mean, I think that perseverance is key to anything that's worthwhile.
And did you feel, Marla, that were there moments where, as you were adapting from a small environment to a larger organization, that you were facing challenges that were unexpected? Or did you feel like the things that you were facing you could predict? Did you sort of operate with some level of anticipation of what those challenges would be, or were they coming from unexpected areas? I'm curious how that transition looked for you, since many of us may want to be exploring that type of career, direction from small to large at some point in our lives.
I mean, I think that the general directions of where problems might come from, whether it's financial or HR related, that's pretty predictable, but the exact nature of what it is and the scope of it can sometimes be overwhelming. When I first got to the port, I was dealing with a very high-profile corruption case. I'm not betraying any confidence because it was in the newspaper, and that was something that no one could have predicted. And there were a lot of nuances to it that made it very challenging to deal with, but we got through it. It was very unfortunate for the organization, but we did take an opportunity to learn from it and to make corrective actions going forward by having more ethics training and more ethics filings and that sort of thing. So you do take every challenge, every stumble as an opportunity to learn and to just push through it.
Right. It's what one does in those moments of unexpected challenges where maybe there is mistakes, maybe there are errors, maybe there are failures, but failures in and of themselves are not just that. There are opportunities for growth and learning, and to be as adaptive as possible. And I think that's one critical element of grit, is that grit requires, in a sense, I would argue, and I'd love to hear, Vinny, your thoughts around this, from your background and success up to this point. Grit requires a certain level of nimbleness and willingness to sort of explore areas of challenges and difficulties, right? And so, Vinny, you have an interesting background that I think, in a way, many of us can relate. You started out as an engineer. Your engineering degree is in metallurgy. That goes back to the late 90s in Brazil. And at the same time, you had aspirations to pursue a life and a career in the United States. Talk about unexpected, unknowing challenges that one might face. That's a big jump in many ways. And it took a decade and a half, nearly, I would say, for you to go from Brazil to the US. And in that journey, you were climbing the corporate ladder very successfully, from a technical advisor to taking on roles across different functional units. So your success wasn't achieved overnight. Your goal of reaching the US didn't happen right away. So what role does grit play for you? What role has it played as you reflect back on your career up to this point?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Alex. As you mentioned, one of my career goals since I started my professional journey in 2000 as a process engineer in Brazil was to have an experience abroad. And that was very clear to me since the beginning. My vision at that time, where the market was very competitive, unemployment rate in Brazil was at the peak for the decade, around 10%. So I knew that I needed to find a way to differentiate myself from others. And I quickly realized that an international experience would be key to succeed in any organization from that time on. So globalization was taking place in Brazil. Actually started a little bit earlier than that, in 1990s, the globalization in Brazil, but companies were looking for an international expansion worldwide, primarily here in North America. So an international exposure would put myself in a different position when I look into the future. So, and grit is very related to that, but because I never lost the focus on my goal. And interestingly enough, in 2001, 1 year after I started my career for that organization, the company I was working for launching a leadership program, development program, where part of this program was an MBA abroad, sponsored by the organization. Unfortunately, I was not selected for that program at that time, and I said to myself that my dream had been just postponed. But and here I think is the first reflection when I look back my career. I never let people and circumstances drag me down from the goal. I think that's very important to, in terms of perseverance. Always looking ahead when people say that's impossible, don't try that, you don't speak English, that's very expensive. So I always took that as a challenge to trying to not lose my focus and keep my goal ahead of me and do whatever is possible decisions I need to take with passion and perseverance to achieve that goal.
Mm-hmm. It's very inspiring, especially my own personal background. I was born in America. My parents migrated from India in the early 80s, and so just knowing from personal experience how much of a risk one takes when they are literally packing their bags and moving into another country. In a way, you're starting from scratch and perhaps with less support than what you had in your original home. So it's very admirable, the journey that you have taken. Was there anything just that was completely unexpected for you in your professional path from Brazil into the US that you weren't expecting, challenge or otherwise? I'm just curious if there's anything that sort of completely threw you off from what you were expecting, if you will.
Yeah, I think there are many, but I think one where this really started was after 4 years working as a process engineer. I was offered a position in sales, right, and for the same organization. And immediately reaction was fear, because I have been training to be an engineer, be a technical, following the technical path for the last, prior to that, 9 years, right? 5 college plus 4 working as a process engineer. So, and questions arise like, is this the best decision that I'm making right now for my career? A lot of, but immediately when I thought about my goal, I thought, okay, maybe the commercial path in this organization would be better for me to have a more exposure throughout the organization, to the leadership. And if I succeed, no experience in sales, but I said if I succeed, probably I'll be better off thinking about this international opportunity. So it took me very quick 4 hours to make that decision. So end up that I met extraordinary people throughout that journey in sales, and that was something that was expected, right? That helped me out to achieve my goal. So
yeah, and it's an interesting point you bring up, that transition from a particular type of functional area to another, or perhaps many of those that are attending the session today are perhaps in the midst of, maybe they're thinking about, maybe they haven't explored it because of fear around a career switch of some sort. Fear is good. Fear can be used to inspire that essence of grit and focus and perseverance that's necessary to make those big leaps professionally. So I appreciate you bringing up the fact that you were scared. I think that is part of being gritty, is dealing with that fear in many ways. And I think, the past almost, now we were talking about this earlier, now almost 2 years of operating in a pandemic, clearly the discussion of grit has sort of come to bear. I'd like to maybe look at this from a slightly higher level now and sort of look at the two of you as organizational leaders and your observations, your experiences in this time of COVID-19. How how has your role evolved as an organizational leader for your businesses, for your organizations, over the course of these, 2 years or so? How have you been able to sort of maintain focus, not just for yourselves, but for your organizations as well, since you play such an influential and empowering role within your organization? So perhaps, Marla, maybe you can share some of your experiences over the past year and a half, 2 years, Grit, and the role that you've been able to sort of play in sustaining the success for your organization, if you will.
Certainly. I'd like to address that both kind of from internally and externally. I work for the Port of Los Angeles, and I'm sure, as a lot of you have seen, we've been in the news a lot lately, just given the supply chain challenges that we've been experiencing. So from a pure external and just financial point of view, given the record amounts of cargo that have been coming to the Port of Los Angeles, it's actually been a financial boom to the port. We just closed our fiscal year, and we've had record revenues coming into the port. And so in that sense, it's been a wonderful opportunity. But obviously dealing with the congestion and consumers waiting for their goods isn't really a good thing, and it's something that we're working towards resolving. I'd say more so internally. I tend to be more internally focused. I almost kind of double as a chief operating officer to some degree sometimes at the port. And so while COVID has changed the way a lot of us work, for my team it's added more work because we were responsible for figuring out how people adjusted to this new reality. So city government is not known as being very nimble, but COVID definitely changed that. I mean, we sent home work within a week. And honestly, when it first happened, I thought we'd be back in about a month or two. And once the summer hit, it was apparent that we were in this for the long haul. But I will say, I mean, historically, working from home and telecommuting has not been a part of the way that we did business. I was joking with you earlier, like I'd never even heard of Teams, Microsoft Teams before the pandemic, and now I know all of these platforms now. And honestly, I hadn't even used these platforms since business school, when we would have our team calls and that sort of thing. So it was kind of, that was another way in which Wimba kind of prepared me for all of this, and just getting reacquainted with video conferencing. So
yes.
I think we were forced into being more nimble than we had been before. And I'll be honest, I've been pleasantly surprised at how it's worked. We're very paper intensive with what we do, and signing documents and moving paper around and just shifting completely, working electronically. In some instances, we have onboarded people, which I was very nervous about, very, very nervous about, like, how are they going to culture and so forth and so on. But it has actually worked pretty well. I mean, I think a part of it, why it's worked well, is because I did work for my team for a good few years before all of this happened, so the relationships are already there. But even for new people that have come to the organization or joined for that, we've been really able to those investments. And we've also seen a lot of opportunities. For those of you who are familiar with Southern California geography, people live, 40 and 50 miles from work. And port is not a centrally located regional asset. So people are commuting a lot to get here. And so the ability to work from home has really presented opportunities for our employees that they didn't have before. I think also just in terms of helping our employees to persevere, we've done a lot with our employee assistance provider in the ways of professional development and promoting mental health resources. We know that this is really challenging, whether it's caring for people with COVID or actually contracted COVID yourself, and for parents who had children at home with them and their pets. I mean, I've seen more cats and children make their Zoom debuts than I can count. It's a lot to deal with. And so that's something that we've been having open and honest dialogues about at work as well.
Right. I think you hit upon a couple of things I just want to echo, and I'd love to have Vinny, maybe you can share your thoughts as well. Zoom is a verb now, so that just tells you the extent of how our day-to-day businesses are operating, and personally as well. In many ways, I've been on many Zoom sessions that are social in nature. So I mean, that tells you the impact that are the shifts that we've been sort of forced to make, because there are no ways to perhaps be together in person, like you mentioned. You also mentioned something I think is so important, that is the importance of the people management piece of leadership, and how critical that is as a leader today. And with all the acceleration that took place in moving to a digital means of business, that person-to-person connection that we all lean on to build that relationship is maybe not as present as it was 2 years ago. So those are just a couple things that I think highlight grit plays a role, having a long-term goal that you're working towards when it comes to internal or external facing constituents, Marla, to use your words, like internal, external, I think are so important. So maybe, Vinny, building upon what Marla mentioned, external, internal dynamics, what has shifted, what have you seen in your sector, in your organization, et cetera, as an organizational leader?
Yeah, for me in particular was a challenge because I switched jobs in December 2019 and then spent some time relocating. And then in March, the company said everybody goes work from home. So I was trying to know the business, interact with people, but it was out of the personal interactions. So it was really challenged, but I think when relates to grit, right, is self-control, purpose, all that, you should keep focus. I think focus, discipline, and communication are three aspects that when we still are in that scenario where we need to keep discipline, to focus what is necessary to delivery with your teams, and communication, right? So trying to keep that connection, see how people are doing, the mental health, and there is a lot of studies showing the impact on that throughout this pandemic. And I think control as well, how you listen, right, and you are open to get feedback and provide feedback to teams to make sure the deliverables are aligned with expectations.
Right. No, that's fantastic, Vinny. And I think I was thinking about this from a few different perspectives. And I remember when we went into lockdown, we had an all-company meeting, and what we mentioned at that point, we thought it would be, like you said, maybe a week or two, and we would be back to work. So our plan was, what are we doing for the next 2 weeks? And I remember the main message that we tried to convey is we're going to simplify things and actually do less, because we kind of can't do everything that we would want to do if we were operating in a normal environment. And we sort of took those 2 weeks and we said, wow, look at all that we accomplished by actually just focusing more by doing less. And the key lesson that I have walked away with, and I'm sure many of us can sort of attest to this, in a way, because of the situation, some resources were no longer available, other opportunities start to come about, and there's this sort of feeling of, well, we need to do more. Marla, to your point, I completely, there's so many aspects of what I see from different levels of us having to do more to support the way in which our businesses are now managing the world of COVID. And at the same time, I think there are also opportunities for us to say, let's simplify, let's do less. And what we found was that in areas that we could just sort of say, you know what, let's stop focusing on 10 different things and focus on the 3 items that really are going to move the needle, because we frankly don't have the luxury to think about 10. That was eye-opening for us in many ways. So in a way, and this is a question that sort of came in from the audience. It was sort of building upon this, and I'll share. This is from one of the attendees. How would you advise sharing? You mentioned mental health and the importance of mental health. So I do want to bring this question up. How do you advise sharing feelings of fatigue, sadness, etc., that I think we're all feeling in the world of COVID? What role can grit and perseverance play? So, Marla, Vinny, are there any examples that come to mind? Any sort of thoughts that you can share around that? How do we convey that? How do we receive that, et cetera, since it's such a critical part of our organizations right now?
And I think part of that, I mean, we've talked about grit and perseverance, and a lot of people might associate that with a certain toughness, but I think that part of it is also kind of the other side of the coin, if you will, and that's allowing yourself to be vulnerable to the extent that it's appropriate. Sharing with your employees that you're having challenges too, and so hopefully that will encourage them to be honest and more forthcoming about what they're going through. Like, I don't want anyone to feel bad about asking for time off to deal with, a sick child or someone who's quarantining, or et cetera, or if you need a little extra time to get through an assignment. I'd like to think that I'm that boss that people feel comfortable coming with that sort of thing. And just being open and honest. I mean, let's not overshare. We don't want to get into too much information, TMI, or anything like that. But, so I think just letting people know that it's okay to take a break, or it's okay to have ask for extra time. And I think a part of the ways in which we've done that here at the Port is by having a series of webinars on managing, change, disruption, whether it's COVID related or driven by something else as well. So I think opening yourself up and allowing people the space to be vulnerable is a key part of perseverance and grit as well.
Right. And serving as an example for those types of use cases, Marla, that you mentioned. Have anything to add from your perspective around that question?
I think I mentioned that, right? And Marla touched on that, communication, right? And first, trust. And that is a part of the organization to understand that situation, and also a role, our responsibility as individuals to raise that flag and say, I have a problem, so how are you going to deal with that? But before that is trust, right? So you need to trust on your leadership, in your team, to make sure you have that open channel to communicate, and I think that's the key to help that out. Sometimes just speaking up is helpful, right? Because sometimes we feel anxious about, wow, I'm not using my time correctly. I have not been productive, I believe. And sometimes talking is just part of the solution to you back on track.
Right. And the different types of communication channels that are available to us, I think, is also something that we sort of should keep in mind. Particularly, every generation has a certain way in which they like to communicate about things, and like you said, Marla, we've made quite a few hires within our company, all through virtual interactions, and we've only met colleagues for the first time when things start to go back into a hybrid mode. But it was interesting to be able to see that there are ways to build that communication channel through a video conversation, and to have that meaningful discussion that could be a place of vulnerability. So I appreciate you sharing that. I want to shift our gears a little bit. I'm going to try to combine two different sort of questions that I want to address in the interest of time, since we only have about 25 minutes left or so. And it was actually driving a little bit more in the direction of the growth mindset. And let's start by just sort of defining collectively what we want to describe what a growth mindset looks like. And I'll lean on something that was communicated and presented by Dr. Nancy Rothbard, who is a Wharton professor of management, in an article that was published a couple of years ago. She was distinguishing and describing the fixed mindset versus a growth mindset. The growth mindset she described as allowing us to embrace challenges and see effort, we can sort of equate effort to grit, as the path to mastery. And having a growth mindset helps us to learn from feedback and setbacks and take responsibility when things don't go as planned. So we've sort of talked about that within the lens of grit, but I want to sort of take this to your experiences at Wharton, and how the Wharton experience for you was an opportunity to operate with a growth mindset, and of course grit and perseverance as well, since when you're in that environment and there is so much to learn and there are setbacks and challenges, especially when there is such a diversity of leaders such as you, both pursuing the executive MBA program there. What did you experience at Wharton? Are there any specific anecdotal examples of a growth mindset or grit or perseverance that you'd like to share with us that we can sort of think about?
Well, for me,
That's
the entire experience, from the application process to actually going through the program was an exercise in having a growth mindset. I mean, there were certain aspects of the process that played into my strengths and some that did not. And so just really trying to grow in those areas where that I wasn't strong, and was an exercise mindset. And I couldn't allow myself to fall back into the fixed mindset that I might have had when I was younger. And honestly, having a fixed mindset about things was something that I probably grew up with and something that I had to grow out of. And realizing that, growing up, I thought, oh, well, just some people are good at math and some are good at reading and some people are good at sports and some aren't, and so forth and so on. But what I've come to learn is that if you're willing to open yourself up and to invest the time and to get the right instruction, and really it's the issue of investment of time to learn something and push through and to study it, you can do it. I remember not doing that well on the GMAT the first time I took it, and so I had to double down on the parts of it that were more challenging for me. By the time I went to Wharton, I'd been out of school for 12 years. Sitting in a 3-hour class was really hard. really, really difficult. It's like, when is this over? And of course, you get used to it, and but you just press through, and you lean on your classmates, and you get help, and you ask questions, and you just go to office hours, and you lean into it, and you get the work done.
Right. And any tangible examples or any experiences that come to mind for you?
So I'd say there are 3 phases: prior, during, and after, right, the program. So prior to the program, I think, story of fun, but yeah, almost fun. So I said, okay, during my application, during the interview, I said, how can I tell my story, right? I convey that I can express, and so I prepared a PowerPoint presentation about my journey, right? From my life, from my career, everything. So it was a PowerPoint presentation. I printed out and I said, okay, let me walk you through the PowerPoint presentation. So I thought that was something different, that I thought I need to do something different here. A simple interview, right? A chat. So that was fun. And during the program is very competitive, and the program pushes you to the limit of your self-control or of your balance between work, yourself, your friends, your community, and your family. I think that's something always not let drag you down, but always keeping the resilience, right? You go up and down, and that's was very interesting to me.
Yeah, and I can imagine that when you are investing so much of yourself into a meaningful experience, there are limitless opportunities for growth to take place. And in a way, I kind of imagine your experiences as having ample opportunities for there to be a feeling of discomfort, and putting yourself in a position where you are with other individuals that have different backgrounds, and coming up with a way to sort of have shared communication, shared experiences that will then lead to some sort of outcome. Is there anything that comes to mind from your time at Wharton? And again, this is sort of the idea behind the growth mindset that pushed you outside of your comfort zone. For example, Marla, in your case, your degree is in, I believe it's in public policy and political science, and now let's call it the traditional poet, if you will, within the MBA type of experience. Whereas you're you're the quant engineer, right? Now that's sort of coming from a different perspective, and now you're all coming together. You know, of course, you were in different classes at Wharton, but where were you feeling discomfort, and that it actually was meaningful, that helped you grow and learn and strive for something that would be successful in terms of outcome? Anything that comes to mind, Marla, Vinny? Feel free, either of you, to jump in there.
Yeah, I can jump in. I think coming from a different education structure environment, right? My whole education background was developed in Brazil, and I think for the first time attending a university or program in US was a really challengeable and make me get out of my comfortable zone, because the system is different, right? And the way things happen, the way you learn, and so that for me was remarkable, and I learned a lot from my classmates, from the faculty. So it was interesting to learn something different, completely different from what I used to, and also different subjects, right? Accounting and so I'm an engineer, so marketing and all that. I had a work experience, but getting the knowledge, I think, was crucial to get out of my comfortable zone.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Great, great. And Marla, anything that comes to mind, Wharton or otherwise, where there was a feeling of uncomfortableness or discomfort, if you will, that was valuable for you in achieving the goal that you ended up achieving?
You know, for whatever reason, I haven't really analyzed it and done the self-analysis to figure out why. I tend to really enjoy things that I'm not that good at. So
Right.
well before Wharton, I used to do triathlons, and I am like I'm not an endurance athlete by any stretch of the imagination, but it's just something that always captured my imagination and I wanted to do. I am probably the worst swimmer you would ever want to see, but I've gotten a lot better, so I have to kind of embrace the kaizen, the improvement that I made, if you will, in learning how to swim. I mean, I signed up for my first triathlon, you know, 6 weeks before the race. I couldn't swim more than 2 laps in a pool, but I just doubled down on that. I mean, for me, that was like the quant part of the GMAT. Like, I just really had to really focus on that and almost leave the other 2 pieces aside and get help, get tutoring, get coaching, so that I wouldn't drown during my first race. But I really enjoy swimming, you know, and I came to really enjoy some of the more quantitative classes at Wharton. Not all of them, but most of them.
Right.
And even after Wharton, I took up or resumed after a 25-year break ballet. I am not that great at ballet. I do not have certain, what my teacher calls ballet gifts of, well, articulated feet and hip rotation that you see in a lot of advanced dancers, but it's something that I enjoy and something that I've been investing my time in, because I like to be able to see the progress that I'm able to make week to week, from month to month, whereas in other activities I can't really see that. So while I might not be the best, or I might not ever be the best, I think about where I started from, where I could barely lift my leg off the ground, and now it's well above 90 degrees. It might not get to 180, but it's closer to 180 than it ever was before. So I really try to really embrace the progress that's made, as opposed to the exact position that I'm at with respect to things that are more of a challenge for me, whether it's the quant stuff or swimming or ballet. I just really try to enjoy the journey.
Yeah, and I think you're bringing up such an important point when it comes to a growth mindset, and that is, it's something that doesn't have to be, you know, in our discussion, it's sort of within sort of the realm of a professional arena, right? Whether it's our individual professional growth, our individual leadership, our the resiliency of our organization, but in reality, so much of what we can do to operate as growth mindset types of leaders is to look at the things that we do outside of a work type of setting. And what you're bringing up, the triathlon, and sort of your dedication to doing the best that you could do as a swimmer, it's touching upon something that I think we can all think about, and that is, how can we operate with a growth mindset in our lives outside of just the work that we do? Because if we are operating with that essence in our day-to-day, naturally failure become data points to learn from and become more educated, more knowledgeable, more aware. And I was, as you were describing that, Marla, I had like two different like images go through my head. One was, I'm from North Carolina, and the part of North Carolina that I grew up in, there weren't that many recreational activities other than bowling. So I moved to North Carolina from the Northeast. I thought I had nothing to do, and really I was forced to do bowling, and that was my source of entertainment. But it became something that I really wanted to get good at. And there's so much that I learned in my journey from just being an amateur bowler to eventually being a competitive bowler in those adolescent years that I still take with me. And that has nothing to do with how I may directly lead to a certain type of revenue model for our business, but those learnings are just so tangible for me in those early days. The other image that I had was my son is learning how to tie shoelaces. He's 3 years old. And the success at the end of the day is, can you tie the knot? But it's just such a far away example of success that I sort of think about at some point, I hope that our company that started from nothing can become a great success, right? And we can quantify that success, but it doesn't happen overnight. Much like you can't really necessarily get to tying shoelaces easily if you're a 3-year-old. And it brings me to a point that you brought up, Marla and Vinny, collectively, and that is breaking down your end goal into smaller successes is so important, because you can get that feeling of progress. You can say, yes, check. I can make the 2 bunny loops. That's what we're working on right now, just getting to the 2 bunny loops to make a knot for our shoelaces. That's sort of where we're at. But then we celebrate those small wins. The small wins then contribute to that larger success. That's where grit can come in. So as leaders, when we think about growth mindset and infusing that within our organizations, especially in the world of the pandemic that we're in, the term work breakdown structure, to me, it's such a common term that we now use within our company, WBS, break it down. Let's break it down into smaller tasks so that if there is a failure, it's a failure of the task. It's not failure of the mission. So let's learn from the failed task, and maybe it means adding in a couple more tasks here and there that then lead to that mission. So that was something that I was envisioning in my mind, Marla, as you were describing that.
Yeah,
we have other
totally
questions that sorry, go ahead, Marla, please, if you can comment on that, and Vinny as well.
I'm a very incremental person, and I do like to break things down into smaller pieces, and it gives you a sense of accomplishment as well. Like when I was learning how to swim for the triathlons, I remember the instructor that I went to said, if you can do 2 laps, that's a huge hurdle because you've doubled what you can do. And while doing 2 laps sounds like not a lot, and eventually you work your way up to doing workouts of 80 and 100 laps, but the idea of doubling something, it's a huge breakthrough mentally, even though it might not seem like a lot in and of itself. And then she's like, you go from 2 to 4, and you get from 4 to 6. And she said, once you get to a point where you can do 10 laps in the pool, it's all gravy after that. And she was right, So I definitely believe in the WBS approach, if you will.
Yep, exactly.
He had big, hairy, and audacious goals with small steps.
Yeah, exactly. Especially in the world that we're in, where we can't collectively, high five one another necessarily all the time, that there needs to be moments that we can celebrate the small successes in a formal or informal manner within a work environment, especially. Vinny, anything else that you could add to that? Anything that sort of comes to mind as we were?
Yeah, I agree. I think part of the grit is like daily improvements, right? Keep in mind your purpose, your goal, but daily improvements are important. So in my example, right, my international experience goal since early in my career, so it took me almost 15 years to be here where I am right now. So, and throughout that journey, a lot of things happen. Be resilient, like how you play, but keep that purpose and that goal in mind, and improve. So I think that's key.
Yeah, that's great. We have about 10 minutes, and we do have a few other questions that are are in a way sort of building upon our discussion. So I'll take a moment to ask those. If any other questions do come from the audience, please, if you have those attendees, please just send them through the questions box as you see here. One question came up, which is an interesting one, and I don't have an answer, so I don't know exactly what my thoughts are, but I'll throw it to you, Marla and Vinny. Do you think someone can have grit without passion? So are they two sort of like interrelated? Is there like a necessary relationship between grit and passion? Or how does passion, in addition to perseverance, elevate someone's grit? Let's go to that first question. Like, is grit, does grit and that sort of dedication, that effort, is passion required, in your opinion? I don't have a professional response to that. I can't base a response off of research, but what are your thoughts around that from your experiences? Perhaps, Vinny, maybe you can jump in first.
Yeah, so I can jump in. So I'd say passion, I think yes, on my view, because at the end of the day is the goal, right? Is the achievement. And the grit concept, that's talent, is different than what you can, and then effort you put in to achieve your goal. And we assume that if you have a goal, your passion to that somehow depends on your goal. But I mean, not necessarily. In my opinion, I think you can, if you have a clear goal that you wanted to achieve, and you mix your skills and effort to achieve that goal, and hopefully you'll be passionate about it, right? What you have done throughout your journey, but not necessarily. Sometimes the passion also can distract you from what you need to do more realistically on a daily basis to achieve your goal. So I think yes.
Yeah. I see it contributing heavily to sort of keeping that focus and the self-control. Marla, what are your thoughts? The relation between grit and passion, is passion a necessity?
How you define passion. I think people tend to think of it as a love or a devotion to something, but given my if you look at it within a religious context, it really means to suffer. So, suffering and grit sometimes go together, but it's, I don't think that you necessarily need to have it, but I think it depends. I think you have to ask yourself, passion for what? Well, you might not have a passion for your career, but you might have a passion for supporting your family, or passion for surviving this difficult situation in order to get to something that's better. So I think it really depends on what. I think I would ask a passion for what?
Right. I feel like this is a good question to ask Angela Duckworth, the relation between passion and grit, and I'm sure there's a lot she can comment around that. I agree with you both. I think the thought that I had in my head was, if I understand the why behind something, I'm gonna be more invested in achieving the goal. I'll give more of myself to whatever it is. And sometimes understanding the why comes from really being self-reflected. It may come from empowering others to see the why. Some things are inherent. I naturally get excited about the small wins that lead to that bigger goal, but others may not. And those that I am depending upon, if they may not share the same passion as I do, but I almost feel like if I at least give them a sense of the why behind something, you can get them to a certain point of resiliency, perhaps not all the way to that level of, Marla, like you mentioned, what is passion? Does passion mean obsession? There are many things that I'm not obsessed about that I am passionate for, I think. It is a very interesting question, and something that I don't think we have a direct answer to, but something to definitely explore as you sort of think about, well, how do I infuse resiliency and grit within those that are in my life, those that I'm looking to support or those that I'm looking to lift, etc. We have about 5 minutes, so again, I'll keep looking at the questions. We have another question that came in. Actually, this is more of a comment. So this is a comment from one of the attendees around this question. I think you need passion to achieve the overall goal, but you don't necessarily need passion for particular tasks related to achieving the goal. Fair enough. I think that's a very fair point. Sometimes the tasks are the mundane things, but you're seeing the longer term vision behind what that task is contributing to. One question came around, and I'll sort of broaden this out a little bit, and that's looking at the importance of grit when it comes to leveraging, let's call it sort of the professional network that's around you. How have you leaned on others to keep you resilient? Sometimes we operate in a vacuum, and sometimes that's not great. Sometimes we need others to sort of lift us up. WEMBA is an incredible example where you are part of a peer group, and oftentimes what is being discussed in your classroom in the executive program are actual real life practical challenges that you're facing in your professional life outside of WEMBA, if you will. So Marla, Vinny, perhaps maybe you can share any thoughts around the importance of other people and giving you that resiliency, that grit. Anything that comes to mind, Marla or Vinny, for either of you that you can share?
I think for me, the first year of the WIMBA program, or at least first few months anyway, I was unfortunately trying to operate in a vacuum because it wasn't a traditional school environment. And then the light bulb just went out, and people were kind of reaching out to me like, Marla, come join the study group, come do this. And it's like, well, duh, why am I not doing this? And so that's been something that helped me just get through the program and bounce ideas off of. And I found myself really being drawn to people who also came within the program who came from a non-traditional background, non-traditional being not corporate America, whether it was the government or nonprofit sector. Just look at ourselves. Why are we putting ourselves through this? but it was a huge source of support having that common professional background and how learning and discussing how we could apply what we were learning in school to our respective nations.
Yeah, great. And Vinny, you were jumping in,
Yeah, I'd say first, you don't achieve your goals by yourself alone, right? I'm grateful to have met outstanding people and leaders who helped me out throughout my journey to be in US. And also, I'm glad to have family, a supportive wife who left behind her amazing career in Brazil to come with me and help me through now how to bouncing back quickly, right? And also Wharton, when you talk about the program, after completing the program, so leverage that network has been crucial to me, right? Recently in this job, I was asked to cover a gap of business development, and the network helped me a lot to make that connections and fulfill that gap.
That's great. Fantastic. I know we have 1 minute, so I'm gonna briefly just ask the audience to please keep the conversation going. You'll have opportunities to share your thoughts. I know there were many questions that we didn't get to. Vinny and Marla, I want to thank you both for your time. You're both incredible, inspirational, and have inspired us in many ways that I can only sort of mention in words at the moment. It's been lovely to getting to know you both through this journey, and I'll let you say your final words and close off. Marla, anything that you can say in a minute or so to close off your reflection on our discussion today? And I'll say the same question. I'll ask the same question to you, Vinny.
Well, first, I just want to thank everyone for this opportunity to participate. But I think my closing advice would be to just really learn to be good at something or enjoy something outside of work, and just try to extrapolate lessons from that that you can use, whether it's at work or in your personal relationships, and try to make it challenging. Something that will provide you the opportunity to grow. A guy I used to work out with used to say, there can be no change without a challenge. So if you're looking to change, you're going to really have to press in.
Well said. Thank you, Marla. Vinny, on your end?
Yeah, thank you for having me. It was great discussion. And also, my advice would be don't lose your focus, right? Keep focus what you want to achieve. You have one life. That's just one life. That's what you have. Take care about yourself, but keep in mind your goals and go forward. So take risks. Don't be afraid. And that's your life. So you should be in control of it.
Fantastic. Thank you, Vinny. And I'll end by sharing just a quote, just to build upon what you said, Vinny. My father said quite a lot when I was young. The greatest mistake I can make in life is to be in continuous fear that I will make one. And I think that sort of encapsulates some of the discussion that we had around grit and perseverance and growth mindset. So I do appreciate everyone joining us today on behalf of both the IAV exec and the team at Wharton. We appreciate your time. We look forward to seeing you again soon. Thank you, everyone. Be well.
Thank you. Bye.